Joining us on the program, Mr. Dave Workman from the Seattle Gun Rights Examiner, continuing on with the Hour of Daves. Dave, how you doing, sir?
I'm fine, Cam. How are you?
I am good. Glad you could join us this evening. So,
well, I've been really busy stockpiling for the end of the world tomorrow.
I know. People are having so much fun with it. You know, those folks were actually wandering around outside the downtown area in Pittsburgh while the NRA annual meeting was in town. Did you
they
see
were.
those
They
folks?
had quite a little convoy.
They did, yeah. Well, here's hoping they're wrong. That's all I can say. Here's hoping they're wrong, and we'll be talking with you again next week.
Well, I hope so.
And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of new stuff next week to talk about. I mean, it seems like, you know, if not every day, every other day, there's new information. The latest this week, I guess probably the biggest story this week, the fact that the DEA apparently recovered a number of firearms in a drug bust last month, and these are firearms, Dave, that we believe were part of Operation Fast and Furious. They were guns that the ATF allowed to be sold to suspected gun traffickers or bad guys. These were recovered in Arizona before they walked across the border, but it really just highlights the fact that there are a lot of guns out there that are still unaccounted for that the ATF allowed to be put in the hands of bad guys.
Well, yeah, as I wrote in my column today, at least one of these guns has been traced back to an unnamed purchaser in the Gunrunner sting who bought several guns in November of 2009. I went back and started looking at who might have been the culprit, and Cheryl Atkinson over at CBS did the same thing. In fact, it was funny. Earlier this week, we kind of tripped over each other tracking down this story, and she did a little list, and then I pulled out the indictment, the original indictment that was handed down against some 20 of these people on the 19th of January, and I found, of course, the name of Jaime Avila, who was one of the lead guys buying these guns. Then there's another guy, Uriel Patino, who, after I started tracking the number of guns this guy sold, he's a one-man gun-running operation. He purchased, over the course of about 8 months, more than 225 guns that I could count. And I may have miscounted there, but it was way over 200 guns. And I sat there, and after I had my little calculator out, and I added them up, and I thought to myself, now, they watched this guy take guns. At one time, he purchased 40 guns, 40 rifles in one visit to a gun shop.
Yeah.
And the ATF knew about this guy, and I'm thinking, no agent in his right mind would want that to happen. As it turns out, some of the whistleblowers are saying the field agents didn't want it, but the higher-ups told them to let the guns go. And it's astonishing the number of firearms that this one guy put out there on the street.
Yeah, it is. And, the thing is, Dave, when you hear about the number of firearms that one individual could put out there, again with this ATF approval, I still think that there are more operations than just Fast and Furious that we haven't heard about. I mean, we know that there are Texas firearms dealers who report having similar conversations with the ATF that if you're selling a firearm in Houston, you're not a part of Fast and Furious. But we know that there were still firearms detailers or retailers, for instance, at Carter's Country, who were told by the ATF, we know that you have problems with the sale. We know that you don't really want to do it, but go ahead. We want you to. You're working with us now.
Yeah, all of this was done under the broader umbrella of our old favorite Project Gunrunner.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, it may have been the ATF, the biggest gun runners of them all. But
yeah.
And I say that, I guess I can laugh about it because as a reporter who's been covering this story and and following it, tracking it, maybe making some new revelations over the past 4.5, almost 5 months. This is probably the damnedest story I think I've ever covered in my life, because it just keeps going and going and going. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. Every time I turn around, there's something new coming up. Earlier this week, as you probably saw in my column, there was a big shakeup. They've transferred and replaced virtually all of the top staff people at the Phoenix ATF office with brand new people. The guy that's down there now is a fellow out of Detroit, and I'm told by ATF insiders that this man is a good man. He's going to go in there, and he's going to clean up that mess. And their words, not mine. So obviously there's a mess down there to be cleaned up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and hopefully it does get cleaned up. Now, I think it's interesting that a lot of these guys were apparently reassigned to Washington, D.C., and to ATF headquarters. Yeah, I jokingly said on the program the other night I would have sent these guys to Walla Walla, and I'm sure that Walla Walla is a fine and dandy place, but I would have sent them somewhere, Dave, where they would have known that it was a punishment.
Well, yeah, I have a suspicion that we're going to get around to that eventually. Issa and that's Congressman Darrell Issa and Senator Chuck Grassley, they're building these investigations slowly, step by step. They're being very meticulous about this. Over the past week, there have been congressional investigators back on the ground in Arizona. Once again, they've been interviewing some of the whistleblowers. To my understanding, they've been talking to some of the gun shop dealers who've been involved in this thing and who raised a stink about it and voiced their concerns. So they're not giving up on this. The story is still very much alive. I'm surprised that it has gone this far without more of the media jumping right on top of this. Although I will say this, that the Washington Times, the Washington Post, they have done a couple of stories on it. I think maybe the interest is turning around a little bit, and quite possibly it's because some of the people in the press, my colleagues, your colleagues too, they've kind of figured out that, gee whiz, this is worse than Watergate, because in Watergate nobody got killed.
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing, Dave, this story goes back now to February. It's hard to remember that's when we first heard about these allegations. But it seems like every time there's a hearing, every time there's new developments, you've got other big stories happening. The death of Osama bin Laden comes out. President Obama gives a speech that everybody, what did he say about Israel, and what does this mean about the borders? At some point, I hope that there's going to be this perfect storm where this is allowed to be the big story that it is. And it's not, that there's a new development that comes out at a time in which Washington, D.C. is relatively quiet, so the story can't be ignored, because I think that's what's happening in some cases.
I think you're right, and I think that's deliberate on the part of a lot of the people in the press. They really don't want to talk about this because it's a scandal of such monumental proportions that to attach something like this to the White House, this could be the linchpin that stops the Obama reelection in 2012. If this were, again, and we've discussed this before, if this were a situation that happened in the Bush White House, this would be on the front page of every newspaper in America, always above the fold. They'd be talking about this day in and day out. Where are the guns? Where are the guns? Mm-hmm. How come you're not making arrests? You're responsible for these people who got killed. Come on, Mr. President, you're lying about this. You're lying about that. None of this seems to be sticking to Obama. But this week may have been a turning point, because what he did to Israel, there are a lot of people who are really angry out there about the Israel thing, and that has a tendency, you know this as well as I do, to start rubbing off on some of the other aspects of a presidency.
Yes.
When a president trips up on something big, they start looking at everything else he does. And Gunrunner is out there.
There you go. Hey, Dave, thank you again for coming on the program, sir. Hope you enjoy your weekend. And I have a feeling we'll be talking to you next week.
Yeah, I sort of suspect that myself.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Dave Workman from the Seattle Gun Rights Examiner and gunweek.com.